Magandang gabi po mga katipon sa Pilipinas. Ito po ang ating katipunan. Muling sumasa inyo mga tagapakinig upang magbigay ng mahalagang impormasyon, magbigay liwanag, at higit sa lahat makinig sa inyong mga daing at kuro-kuro hinggil sa mga problemang patuloy na nagpapahirap sa ating kalagayan at kabuhayan. Sa susunod na 2 oras, sisikapin po namin ipaliwanag ang iba-ibang bahagi ng ating ekonomiya at ang mga mabibigat na local and international issues na may malaking epekto sa ating buhay at kinabukasan. Ito po ang inyong katipon na si Butch Valdes. Kasama po natin ang ating co-host na si Itos Valdes at ang iba pang mga tiga Save the Nation movement. Nandito din yung Philippine LaRouche Society at ang Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino. Ito pong partido natin. Kami po lahat dito ay nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makibahagi sa ating talakayan sa pagsusuri ng mga kasalukuyang problema at paghahanap ng kaukulang solusyon. Okay, ngayong gabi,
we will continue.
Ang ginawa namin po last time, pinangako namin sa iyo na ipapagpatuloy natin ang discussion tungkol dito sa COVID at saka yung mga pinapatent nila na...
Kasi last week, Nuremberg Code, di ba?
Nuremberg Code. Tapos itong mga pinapatent ng mga taong may nagplaplano noon na mag-ilalabas ng COVID-19 tsaka ito pong ito pong vaccine, no? Ngunit ang ginawa po ng YouTube ay sinuspend na naman tayo at hindi na naman tayo makalabas dito sa ating account sa YouTube, no? At naperisyo pa rin, pati na yung ating kaibigan na DCXL na naka-on stream din yung programa natin. So for the meantime, we just have to play the game no matter how anti-free speech itong nangyayari. Right. No? Lagana po ang kanilang pagpuputol. Hindi lang po tayong programa. But lahat ng linalabas, wala na silang masyadong evaluation. Basta meron silang nakitang video na ganyan, putol agad. No? Ini-strike ka agad. So in the meantime, anong topic natin ngayon? Pinag-usapan namin ni Itos na siguro magandang pag-usapan itong palagi natin nababanggit na CIA. Ang dalas natin sinabi na, CIA yan. Tuwing meron tayong gustong itukoy na gawa ng Amerikanong masama, na sinasabi natin po CIA. So let's get a little background on this and try to be very objective to see what they really are, what their purpose is, and how they've been functioning in these past decades from the time they were organized.
Right. So we have, syempre, kami ni Chairman since for a long time. We've been we would say very well versed in these types of topics, in issues, because marami po kaming nire-research since matagal na po. And knowing that there is something else at work, not just events that we see. Pag nangyari ganito sa Pilipinas, bakit nangyayaring ganon? How did it come to fruition? All of these things. So you have to look beyond. And one of those things, and jumping off from last week, tayo, Nuremberg, and then Hitler, and that discussion. The week before, we started with the Illuminati, right? And these secret organizations. So I think, kumbaga part 3 to, di ba? ng ating mga topic na parang ano ba yung mga organization behind what we see? Are there forces at work? And one of those, napag-usapan namin kanina over lunch, was the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, which is known as the CIA. Pati si Duterte mentioned it when he was elected. Pag ako pinatay, alam mo, CIA ang pumatay sa atin. Sino ba itong mga to? And how widespread is their influence in our affairs? So we'll show you a video first. Don't know how long it is. Basta yung origins ng ating So this is online also. We'll show you video, then we'll be commenting on it and how they may have influenced our own politics since after World War II or even before. Okay.
America has a lot of intelligence agencies, a whopping 16 to be exact. During the Cold War, 2 stand out as particularly important players in the spy versus spy game between the United States and the Soviet Union: the National Security Agency and the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was, and is, tasked with spying and espionage abroad, while the NSA concerns itself with monitoring and decrypting communications. Both of them developed from the experiences America had during the 2 world wars, and during the 20th century would grow to become shadowy organizations with secret budgets and powers beyond possibly even their own government's control. But before we tell the story of what they've done, or at least have been accused of doing, we have to, as we did in our video on the KGB, find out about the humble origins of these 2 organizations. I'm your host David, and this week it's all about cloak and dagger bureaucracy. This is the Cold War. All warfare is won and lost on intelligence. As long as countries have been competing for power, there have been spies to uncover and counter each other's plans. The value of intelligence has been written about at least as far back as Sun Tzu. By the time of the World Wars, however, the game had changed quite a bit. Inventions in technology like radios, machine encryption, and advanced cryptography created a need for a much broader bureaucracy to handle the sheer volume of information. Now, the first seeds of what would become the NSA and CIA come from the First World War. The US found itself needing telegraph machines and cable systems to coordinate the US's efforts against the Germans. To handle the development of codes and ciphers for said machines, the US set up a small Washington bureau to manage this operation called the Cable and Telegraph Bureau, or Cipher Bureau. By the end of the war, it had moved to New York City and absorbed the other cryptographic organization managed by the US Navy. It was also renamed to Military Intelligence, or MI8. After the war, although MI8 was officially disbanded, instead of shutting down the organization, it continued under the name of the Cipher Bureau, which even had its own disguise, posing as a private company selling commercial code. Still, it had the intriguing nickname of the Black Chamber. It did peacetime cryptanalytic work for the State Department and US Army. Their work focused on intercepting and breaking the diplomatic codes of other countries, including allies, because let's be honest, every country is spying on every other country to one extent or another. There's no real trust in high politics. They got the telegrams by convincing Western Union to illegally send them copies of telegrams going to consulates and embassies within the US. They'd continue to do this until a 1927 law passed increasing punishments for intercepting other people's telegrams. The Black Chamber was led by cryptologist Herbert Yeardley, who ran the organization until the government cut it in 1929. In something that may be seen as out of place today, the US government closed it because, well, gentlemen don't read other people's mail. Yeardley, for his part, continued to do a little bit of work doing cryptography for the Canadian and Chinese governments during the Second World War, and then wrote a book on his time in the Black Chamber. I should also note that in 1930, the military set up its own cryptanalysis organization as a sort of successor called the Signal Intelligence Service, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. This project was only the beginning of such programs, and nowhere close to the end of them. The Second World War would end up revitalizing and vastly expanding such programs, leading to the births of both the CIA and NSA. Now, during the Second World War, the US and UK found themselves working in close collaboration with each other. As such, the Americans saw the effectiveness of the British intelligence services. The British trained special operations officers through the Special Operations Executive, whose job was to raid and sabotage German operations in continental Europe. They modeled their tactics after their experience fighting the Boers in South Africa. They would strike hard and fast and then disappear before the enemy could mount a response. Along with this, the British also had a well-developed cryptanalytic intelligence operation known as the Secret Intelligence Service, or MI6. MI6 decoded enemy radio transmissions, collected information with aerial photography, and even worked on sowing disinformation to the enemy to confuse their spies. These two organizations inspired US President Franklin Roosevelt and prompted the US to make its own version. He signed into existence a new intelligence organization called the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, in 1942. The OSS became a precious asset for the United States and the Allies during the war, figuring out how the German war effort functioned. When the Americans entered the European theater of the war, the OSS found allies and landing spots in North Africa for the US military to begin their invasion there. They also sabotaged infrastructure, spread anti-Nazi propaganda, and organized resistance fighters against both the Germans and Japanese. Many Cold War figures, like Ho Chi Minh and Mao Zedong, received arms and training for their soldiers from OSS operatives. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the US does have an established track record of training and arming its future enemies. But I digress. Now, it's also during this time, and this is not officially confirmed since the paper trail either remains classified or may have even been destroyed, the OSS purchased cryptographic tools for breaking Soviet codes, while still wartime allies with Moscow, spying on your friends and all of that. At the same time as this was going on, the Signal Intelligence Service continued to provide cryptanalysis for the Army, trying to decipher Axis communications, as well as train signal units for the battlefield. Think of the OSS as spies and commandos in the field, while the SIS were Washington-based mathematicians in suits breaking codes. Notably, about 70% of the SIS's staff were women. Included in these women would be future NSA Deputy Director and Japanese codecracker extraordinaire Anne Cara Christie. her team's work uncovered the shipping codes of the Japanese Navy and wound up sinking 2/3 of their merchant marine. Like the SIS, they too began to intercept and try to crack Soviet codes, which would lead to the Venona project, which we've actually talked about in earlier videos, and we'll discuss more in the future. This Venona project exposed a network of Soviet spies across North America, including the collection of nuclear spies at Los Alamos. With the war's end in 1945, the OSS and SIS were both dissolved as organizations and absorbed into other bureaucracies. There was a major discussion in American military circles about how to organize the post-war armed forces. In these early meetings, the first utterance of making a centralized intelligence agency was floated, which manifested itself, against the wishes of the Army and the FBI, mind you, into the National Intelligence Authority. US President Harry Truman signed the organization into existence in 1946, as well as an operations group known as the Central Intelligence Group, or CIG. The next year, however, in the face of the deepening conflict with the Soviet Union, Truman signed the National Security Act, which reorganized both these organizations yet again. One became the National Security Council, which is the body the president goes to for discussion on national security issues, and the Central Intelligence Agency. The famous, or infamous, CIA was officially born. The CIA was created with 4 relatively broad main tasks in mind. 1. Advise the National Security Council on matters related to national security. 2. Make recommendations to the NSC regarding the coordination of intelligence activities of the departments. 3. Correlate and evaluate intelligence and provide for its appropriate dissemination. And 4. Perform such other functions as the NSC will from time to time direct. In 1949, the Central Intelligence Agency Act gave it a secret budget, allowed for a secret organizational structure, and gave it extreme protection from any form of accountability or transparency. The intent was to allow the new agency freedom to operate quickly in defense of liberty and justice without bureaucracy to slow things down. What could possibly go wrong here, right? Now, also in 1949, the various cryptographic departments through the government became centralized under one organization called the Armed Forces Security Agency. The chiefs of staff of the different branches of the armed forces all commanded them. This organizational structure is a big deal, as jurisdictional fights between the branches of the military were, and still are, a big thing. Some strange developments, like nuclear submarines for example, are part of the compromise to let every branch of the military have its own nukes, for example. But the problem with the AFSA from the beginning was that, unlike the CIA, it was a military organization, and thus it didn't coordinate well with the civilian structure of the US government. They clashed and rarely communicated well with their siblings like the CIA and FBI. The AFSA was stepping on a lot of toes, and generally the intelligence branches of the US weren't functioning well. This organizational problem prompted a need for yet another reorganization effort ordered by President Truman in 1951. This investigation resulted in the directive to create the National Security Agency, which came into existence late the next year. The NSA would be in charge of all communications intelligence, while the CIA took care of espionage. But here's the thing, that was all a secret. The NSA was a secret branch of the intelligence service. The memo creating it was classified, and the joke around the office was that the NSA stood for no such agency. The US government would grow to become obsessed with intelligence gathering and analysis, hence the 16 agencies I'd mentioned earlier. Secrets and special operations were par for the course. Throughout this channel's run, many of the plans to assassinate the leaders of decolonization movements, overthrow governments, or sabotage communist organizations would occur under the watch of the CIA. At the same time, the NSA would have its ears everywhere, and which we saw when Edward Snowden leaked plans on PRISM, really means everywhere. The FBI would use similar tactics to undermine the domestic anti-war and civil rights movements at home. All of this was done in the name of stopping communism, or depending on your worldview, to crush dissent at home. More than one parallel has been drawn to their KGB cousins in the Soviet Union. The Cold War would allow these intelligence agencies to grow into massive, almost unaccountable bureaucracies, which in some ways persist to this day. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss all of our future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have wiretapped the bell button. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com, and we're also active on Facebook and Instagram at The Cold War TV. If
Okay, yan po ang very brief history ng intelligence activities ng bansang Amerika that culminated in the development of the CIA. Very briefly, ang sabi nila tuwing daw merong World War I na meron po silang palaging ini-intercept na mga
Telegram.
mga sulat, telegram, ganyan. Tapos yun ang kukunin nila para doon sa kalaban, no? Tapos nagkaroon sila ng iba-ibang klaseng kakayanan, no? They became more and more sophisticated.
As technology
As
improved.
technology improved. Ang ginagawa naman mo iba-ibang bansa, nagkakaroon sila ng codes. Yung mga secret code, no? Para hindi agad-agad makuha. Ngayon, para mag-improve naman ang pagbabasa, nag-akot na naman ng mga tao ang mga ibang bansa. At ang Amerika at ang British ang gumagawa nito. At para marunong mag-decipher ng codes. So pataas ng pataas ang kanilang mga activities and capabilities dito sa intelligence information. No? At tapos nung napapunta ang Amerika dito sa Second World War, naitayo dahil kakailanganin nga ito, yung isa yung sa intelligence services sa loob ng Amerika, SIS, tapos yung isa OSS, yung Overseas Secret Service na itinayo ni Franklin Roosevelt. Kasi nga, nasa gera na sila, kailangan meron silang mga espiya sa mga iba-ibang lugar ng mundo na kalaban nila o maski kakampi nila para makapagkuha ng mga information sa mga embahada at sa mga iba-ibang mga institusyon, makuha nilang information na dinadala nila ngayon sa headquarters. Pagkatapos ng gera, nag-isip sila kung paanong i-coordinate ng intelligence activities ng isang while they are at peace. Dahil hindi naman sila gera. Dito si Harry Truman, kinonsolidate niya yung SIS tsaka CIA at OSS into one CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. At binigyan niya ng matinding poder. Siya yung nagko-coordinate ng mga intelligence groups dito sa mga iba-ibang ahensya ng gobyerno. Tapos mayroon pa siyang nakatago doon parang and other types of activities. At itong batas na ito gave the CIA tremendous power because it was free from being investigated by Congress. No?
The US government.
Yeah, so kaya nilang gumalaw at gumalaw. At nang palaki ang kanilang activities, umabot na dito kasi pumasok na yung Cold War, umabot na sa sino ba ang kalaban at sino hindi, ganyan, no?
Okay.
Na kung perceive kang kalaban, di babantayan ka, yung mga komunista noon, siyempre kalaban ng Amerika. babantayan kung sino yung mga parang tumutulong sa mga komunista at kung presidente sila ng mga bansa
Mm.
na sa paglalagay nila masyadong malapit sa komunista, gumagawa sila ng paraan para palitan. Tapos gumagawa din silang paraan para magluklok ng mga presidente
Mm.
ah, na na malapit sa kanila, na kontrolado nila. Ganyan po yung nangyayari. At ganyan din ang ating sinapit and CIA became a byword here in the Philippines because we were critical to the US control
Mm.
of this part of the world. So they wanted governments in the Philippines to be very much dependent on the United States. No?
Just wanted to add there, kasi bakit pa kailangan itong mga intelligence network? There is no more apt saying to this than information is power. So, since then, since the beginning, pag mas marami kang alam sa kalaban mo, o sa mga kakampi mo even, mas marami kang information na alam, mas lamang ka kasi alam mo kung paano lumaban. So, since World War I, they intercepted pati personal telegrams until in-outlaw na po yon. Kasi kailangan nilang mag-gather o kumuha ng mga intelligence, they call it intelligence, pero information nga. So, information gathering sila, tapos mag-a-analyze sila ng mga information kung saan galing, ba't nila pinadala dito, sinong pinapadalhan niya, ano ba yung network niya. So makikita nila kung sino-sino yung mga tao at may alam sila sa bawat tao, bawat businessman, bawat general, bawat cabinet member, bawat lahat. That's their intelligence gathering. So World War II, it became that. Nakita nyo po, may scene doon. Sabi ko, nag-remark ako kay chairman, wala pa kasing satellites. Ang ginagawa nila, ini-intercept nila yung mga communications through radio. Kung coded man yung message, dinidecipher nila. Tapos sasabihin nila, dito yung plano nila dito. Tapos ipa-plot nila sa isang map. Tapos kailangan code. So, magpapadala ako ng sulat, pero coded siya. Tapos yung tatanggap ng sulat, meron siyang code breaker. So, ilalagay nila sa taas, tapos ito talaga yung mensahe. Okay? Kasi alam nila, baka pag na-intercept yan ng CIA o kalaban, hindi nila alam kung ano talaga sinasabi. Pero that's what they did at the time. Kasi walang satellites, walang technology, wala pang computer na ganito. Ngayon, ibang level na yung kolekta sila ng data. And as the CIA became more powerful and more influential, they were able to, as the Cold War started after World War II, kita nyo ba yung, alam nyo po si James Bond, di ba? Spy, espia, James Bond, 007, di ba, sa mga sinehan. He was working for on His Majesty's Secret Service. Spia siya. Okay? Pero ginawa nilang maganda, spy versus spy, tapos kalaban nila, ganyan. Tapos, during the Cold War, bakit kailangan ng spy? Ano ba yung spy? Because you cannot, it takes many forms. You can be a business leader, supported by the CIA, and you're giving intelligence. Kasi marami kang kilala. So you will give now intelligence to information to the CIA. Magkano bang kinikita nito? Ginagamit nila yon in case they want to push a certain outcome. In this case, a lot of the times, when you see regime changes, the most famous is how they do regime changes. Ano ba yung regime change? Papalitan nila yung gobyernong ayaw nila. Because they cannot invade, gagawin nila, they will do it from within. They will use certain groups within. So they need a lot of intelligence. Now, there's a list here where It says the 7 governments the US through the CIA has overthrown. I will just read it, no, and then you can comment, Chairman. Na involved yung CIA bago na palit yung government, because you need to what
Alam
you
niyo
call,
po,
erode, or you
yung
need
operation ng CIA, sisirain muna nila yung nakaluklok na presidente. At gumagawa silang iba-ibang mga pamamaraan, no? Kuminsan bibigyan nila ng pera yung mga oposisyon, no? O kaya bibigyan nilang pera yung mga rebelde, no?
right.
Para magkaroon sila ng lakas, no? Lumaban sa gobyerno. Tapos pag may mga pinatay na naman yung gobyerno, yan ang ilalabas nilang kasalanan nitong ng gobyerno. Kasalanan ng gobyerno na napatay itong mga ito. So masisira sila sa media, no? Kasi ang media importante sa kanila, no? Tsaka dito sa mga mamamayan, no? So they first destroy the reputation and the credibility of the sitting president, and then they replace him either in a fake revolution, in a revolution or a fake revolution that they manipulated, or by elections, which they also manipulate, para makapasok yung kanilang gusto.
Yeah, and then pag pinasok na nila yung gusto nila, at least yung strategic positioning nila mas matibay. Kasi ang US has their own interest. US, Britain has their own interest. For example, China has their own interest. So they will look at different areas sa mundo. Saan tayo malakas, saan tayo mahina. Saan pwede pumunta yung mga ating mga kumpanya. Saan pwede natin gawin ito, ganito. So dun sila. So marami po nangyayari sa mundo. Nakikita na natin as news events. Pero hindi po nakikita natin yung galaw. And nakikita nalalaman na lang natin two decades after when the classified documents are released. One of those, sige.
Hindi, dagdag ko lang. Hindi porke ang pinalitan ng CIA, yung pinalitan nila ay masama at yung ipapalit nila ay mahusay.
Yes.
Kadalasan nga, yung ipinapalit nila ang masama at yung mahusay ang natatanggal.
Right.
Kasi ayaw ng CIA ng Amerika na
Independent.
Ayaw nila yung hindi nakasandal sa kanila.
Right.
Kasi ang laban nito, yung komunista, dati yung Soviet Union o Russia, no? Tsaka yung Amerika, ito yung dalawa, no? Later on yung China. Pero wala pa yung China noon, nakasirado eh.
Right.
Yan ang labanan sa Cold War. Kanya, you are either with them or against them. Ganyan mag-isip. So pag gusto mong maging independent, ayaw nila yon. Pag independent ka, kinakailangan papalitan ka para mapalitan ka ng isang nakasandal sa Amerika. Ganyan, hawak nila.
It's parang ginagawa nilang chessboard ang buong mundo. Ito yung galaw ng kalaban, dito tayo gagalaw. Pero hindi mo nakikita, ito yung galaw mo, pero ang gusto mo talaga dito sa kabila. It's very strategic. Magaling itong mga intelligence agents, pero ang galing nila magmanipula kasi kontrolado rin nila yung media, which we will get into later.
Yung media maaga pa, alam na nila na strategic na weapon.
Right.
No?
It's propaganda.
Yun ang wala itong mga kalaban nila sa USSR, mga KGB, mga ganyan. No?
Right.
Wala silang propaganda arm na ganyan. Kasi yung mga komunista hindi ganyan mag-isip.
Yeah.
Pero itong mga kasama ng bansang Amerika, ganyan sila mag-isip dahil maaga pa nagde-develop na yung kanilang media.
Right.
No?
Right. So I'll just go through some countries na nalaman na natin na kasama yung CIA sa operation na pagtanggal sa isang sitting president. Whether bad or good or useful or hindi sa kanila at that time, right? Minsan kasi sa umpisa, kaibigan nila eh. Tapos pag medyo gumano na sa kabila, alisin na nila. So they will replace. But I will go through some countries where based on declassified documents, umamin sila na kasama sila doon. Number one is Iran in 1953. The CIA role in the 1949 coup to install a military government in Syria. The ouster of Iranian Prime Minister Mohammed Mossadegh is the earlier coup of the Cold War that the US has acknowledged. Acknowledged na sila ang nagpresenta.
Sila nagtanggal.
Yeah, so sabi nila, according to the declassified history of the CIA, sabi nila, it was the potential to leave Iran open to Soviet aggression. At the time when the Cold War was at its height, and when the United States was involved in an undeclared war in Korea. So meron na silang mapasok sa Korea. Against forces supported by the USSR and China. So, imagine dito tayo sa Korea and China. Pero, nagpalit sila ng gobyerno dito sa Iran sa kabila. But close to the Soviet Union. So, nag-iisip sila para ma-distract tong Soviet. Pero sa Cold War, dito sila lalamang sa China. So, ganun sila mag-isip. Number 2, Guatemala, 1954. United States was initially supportive of Guatemalan President Jacobo Arbenz. The State Department felt his rise through U.S.-trained and armed military would be an asset. The relationship soured as Arbenz attempted a series of land reforms that threatened the holdings of U.S.-owned United Fruit Company. United Fruit is another thing. So nag-coup sila. Nag-coup sila sa 1954 supported by the CIA against Arbenz, our sitting president. Tinanggal nila.
Kasi gusto mag-land reform, andun yung plantation ng mga American Fruit Company. Parang mga ano yan, mga Del Monte, yung mga ganyan,
exactly
diba?
Exactly that. And then, classified details of the CIA involvement in the ouster of the leader, which included equipping rebels and paramilitary troops while the U.S. Navy blockaded the coast, came to light in 1999. So this was 40 years after. So inamin nila. So they did that. Pero nagawa nila yung gusto nila. Congo, 1960. This is very important because Congo, African nations were wanting independence slowly. Okay, and they wanted to break away from colonial during the 1960s. And one of the leaders, and I know this, I've researched this guy, Patrice Lumumba, is one of the big, Congo, African nation, Central Africa po yun. He wanted to unite all of Africa, parang United States. And he was a good friend of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. Yes, he was one of those leaders they supported. Ang nangyari po nila sa kanya, very sad. You know, the first Prime Minister of Congo was pushed out of office by Congolese President Joseph Kasavubu amid the US-supported Belgian military intervention in the country. It is a violent effort to maintain the Belgian business interests after the country's decolonization. Lumumba maintained an armed opposition to the Belgian military and after approaching Soviet Union for supplies, was targeted by the CIA once the agency determined he was a threat to the newly installed government of Joseph Mobutu. After an aborted assassination attempt against Lumumba involving a poisoned handkerchief, the CIA alerted Congolese troops to Lumumba's location and noted roads to be blocked and potential escape routes. Lumumba was captured in 1960 and killed by January the following year. So ginamit nila yung kalaban niya to take him out. But this guy was a leader. He was a very independent, and he would have been a good leader for Africa and for the independence and development of Africa. Yung mga speeches po niya magagaling tong si Lumumba. Marami pa. 1961, Dominican Republic. Dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo, which included ethnic cleansing of thousands of Haitians. The Dominican Republic, an attempted assassination of the president of Venezuela, ended when he was ambushed and killed by armed political dissidents. The CIA was involved. The gunman who shot Trujillo maintained that nobody told me and go to kill Trujillo. He did in fact have the support of the CIA. So the CIA, they found that the material support consisting of 3 pistols, 3 carbines were supplied to various dissidents. United States officials knew that the dissidents intended to overthrow Trujillo, probably by assassination. South Vietnam, 1963. United States was already deeply involved in South Vietnam in 1963, and its relationship with the country's leader, Ngo Diem, was growing increasingly strained amidst Diem's crackdown on Buddhist dissidents. According to the Pentagon Papers, South Vietnamese generals plotting a coup contact U.S. officials about their plan. After some starts and a period of U.S. indecision, the general seized and killed Diem on November 1, 1963 with U.S. support, which by some accounts partially came in the form of money from the CIA. So, meron pa siya. Brazil, 1964. President João Goulart. They wanted to make Brazil like China of the 1960s, sabi nila. The United States backed a 1964 coup led by Humberto Branco, the chief of staff of the Brazilian army, providing fuel and arms and equipment again. And Lyndon Johnson told his advisors planning the coup. Lyndon Johnson po ang naging presidente after Kennedy was assassinated. According to declassified government records obtained by the National Security Archive, the Brazilian military went on to govern the country until 1985. Chile, 1973. United States never liked Salvador Allende, the socialist candidate elected to the president of Chile in 1970. President Richard Nixon told the CIA to, quote, make the Chilean economy scream. And the agency worked with 3 Chilean groups, each plotting a coup against Allende in 1970. So those are just 7. The most of that was in South America. 1 was in Iran. And we know
Marami pa.
marami pa later on.
Isa yung style nila, sasabihin nila, gagawa silang paraan para ibagsak yung ekonomiya.
Right.
Bagsak yung ekonomiya ng bansa. Tapos, ang ibibintang dito sa mga nakaupong presidente. No?
Right.
And then, after that, he will become unpopular. Tapos, mas madali nilang tanggalin. Nahihirapan sila kung tatanggalin nila popular yung yung presidente. Mas gusto nila ang pinapaupo nila presidenteng popular dahil maski na labag sa prinsipyo dahil mahal siya ng tao, no? Mas madali nilang hawakan dahil hawak mo na yung hawak mo na yung presidente. Kung anong sasabihin na nyo, gagawin niya, susunod yung mga tao. Pero kung hindi sa popular, hindi mo masabi dun sa presidente na gawin mo to dahil yung tao kukontra sa kanya. No? So mapoproblema pa din siya dyan. Yeah.
But you can see also that how they work within your governments. So they will get someone that wants to be a leader. For example, sasabihin nila, gusto namin palitan to because he's not aligned with our agenda or interest. Itong presidenteng to, masyadong independent. He wants sovereignty. He wants his country to develop. Hindi pwede yan kasi may business interest kami dito. So they will talk to other prominent figures and say, we will make you president. But this is what we're going to do. Things like that.
They can create all kinds of problems for the sitting president. For example, itong nangyari sa atin dito sa 1986. No? CIA po yan, no? Mismo sila, mismo si Secretary of State George Shultz, inaamin niya na sila ang nagpatanggal
Right.
kay Marcos at ginamit nila lahat ng kakayanan nila sa CIA para matanggal. At itong mga kausap nila, mga oposisyon, sila ang ginamit at nagbigay sila ng mga pondo. Dito sa, for example, dito sa Ukraine, yung nangyari sa Ukraine, no? Tinanggal nila yung presidente ng Ukraine. Ang Ukraine po kasi katabing bansa ng ng Russia, no?
Right.
So ang ginawa nila ito mabait sa magkaibigan sila ng Russia, no? Yung presidente doon, I don't know the name, maybe you can look it up. Tinanggal ng CIA at sila mismo ang nagsasabi, CIA,
Right.
Nuland ba yun?
Victoria Nuland.
Victoria Nuland, CIA operative claimed that they spent $6 billion to oust that president and to put in whoever they wanted. And that president who was ousted had to go back, had to run to Russia for his life, no?
Poroshenko, not Poroshenko.
Poroshenko yung pinasok nila
Yeah.
ng CIA. Yan si Gaddafi. CIA operation din yan. No? Si
Hindi.
yung isa, si Iraq. Saddam Hussein, CIA operation din yan.
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize that because the president of the US at that time was the former director of the CIA.
Of the CIA.
Si George Herbert Walker Bush.
Bush. No?
Si Bush 1.
He was the second in command of
Second
the
in
CIA, at the time before he became vice president and then finally as president. No?
Right.
So they really work with the CIA operatives. In other words, naging sophisticated na sila at hindi lang sufficient, much more blatant. They don't care if you know it is the CIA. And kapars natin dito, kung minsan meron tayong makikilalang Amerikano na alam natin, umiikot lang siya, humingi ng mga information na parang CIA to. Pero we allow it, meaning it's a fact of our life that they're around, sniffing around, and maybe working to oust the sitting president. Kaya ngayon, itong si President Duterte, dapat mag-ingat na siya. Kasi dati, nung popular pa siya, baka hindi pa siya pwedeng i-target ng CIA. Ngayon, hindi na siya masyadong popular, no? Dahil galit na yung mga tao sa mga hindi niya nagawa. Baka ngayon ang kanilang opportunity. Dahil mismong si Duterte nagsasabi, if my airplane crashes or anything like that I'm shot, you blame the CIA, sabi niya. No?
Yeah.
Alam niya no? So, ito yung nature ng Central Intelligence Agency.
Right.
But the thing is, they work together, not just alone, but they work together with characters like George Soros. No? George Soros is not directly part of the organization.
Not in name.
Not in name, but in operations, no, and in interest.
Shared interest.
Nagpapareho sila, no? Katulad po nitong plano nila yung ginawa nila sa Myanmar noon. They created Aung San Suu Kyi,
Yes.
no? Because they wanted Aung San Suu Kyi to topple the military government in Myanmar. Dahil Burma or Myanmar was then part of the so-called Golden Triangle for drugs, for opium coming from that part of the world.
Burma, Myanmar, Thailand.
And
Golden
no,
Triangle.
Laos yata.
Laos. Yeah.
And then, and they wanted to revive that because George Soros is the number one proponent for drug legalization.
Oh, open society.
Open society. Ito yung mga kaibigan nila Lenny Robredo, ni Trillanes, nitong sila Gascon sa human rights natin.
Yeah.
At iba pang mga politiko. Yan ang kaibigan nila, si George Soros.
Yeah.
Hindi sa kakampi kami kay Duterte, pero ito yung kumakalaban talaga kay Duterte, no? Na gusto siyang tanggalin.
Yeah.
Yung mga ICC na yan, International Criminal Court, no? It's not a United Nations body.
Not recognized. Not...
Yeah, it is formed among, let's say, commitment by different countries to form a group that will have some sort of a and come out with a court, no? Pero ang principal funder niyan is George Soros. Ang principal, and many other so-called arbitration courts.
Right.
Siya pa rin.
Yeah.
Because they use the decisions made by these courts, supposedly courts,
Right.
To propagandize against leaders, no? To propagandize against leaders that they want to be toppled.
They don't agree with policy. They will use opposition groups, quote unquote, and then they will charge you sa ICC. Tapos ngayon, ikaw, you're left to defend yourself and your So dun sa ICC, parang ginagamit nila pang sangga sa'yo or whatever. So, but I wanted to go back to the CIA and the influence here. Lalo na here, there was now kasi makikita natin, CIA kasama dito, CIA, si Schultz after Marcos was removed, and years after, nagyabang si Schultz. The funny thing about that is nagyabang si Schultz on an interview on TV na yes, we took him out. We took him out, we cooperated, we organized to take him out. Tapos yung mga tao dito, ayaw pa siya paniwala. Sabi nila, hindi, people power talaga yan. That's removed him. And this is the principal person ng United States admitting that yes, kami nag-operate niyan.
You look at the,
Di ba
ano ba yung libro ni Schultz?
Let me look at that.
Yung kanyang parang pinaka-memoir,
Mm.
I think he devoted 2 chapters there on the Philippines. No? And it showed what their role was. No? Siya tsaka si Paul Wolfowitz. No? Pero yan, the CIA is under the State Department. Organizationally, it's under the State Department.
Yeah.
And it works principally overseas. No? At lahat ng embassies, in effect, are extensions of the State Department. Parang foreign affairs, no? State Department is the U.S. Foreign Affairs.
Turmoil and Triumph. My years as Secretary of State, I guess that's it.
Turmoil and Triumph. Yan yung libro na. If you want to look at it, look for it. I'm sure that's available in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Or anywhere.
Yeah.
And then, tingnan nyo.
Basahin nyo.
Ito yung memoirs ni George Shultz as the sitting Secretary of State.
Yeah.
No? Dito sa librong ito, he was even criticizing President Reagan for being too friendly with Marcos. No? At pero galit na galit siya kay Imelda Marcos. No? Pero pagkatapos, nag-decide sila, mag-ooperate sila against the Marcoses. So, naiinis siya dahil itong si President Reagan, ayaw to go against President Marcos dahil mahusay daw na presidente si Marcos.
Ayaw niyang patanggal.
Tapos, ang ginawa nitong si Schultz, siya mismo ang kumamada.
Yes.
Around the president. Pati na kinausap niya sila Solars, sila
Stephen Solars.
tsaka yung mga ibang mga si Habib, anong pangalan yun? But Habib. No? Yung mga yan, tsaka sila what's his name?
Who was he?
Congressman Anyway, one other guy, no? And
Sila nang gumawa.
sila ang kumamada.
Going-
Sila mismo bumibisita dito, no?
Going against his own president.
Kaya, until finally, no, he got the president surrounded already. That whenever the president Reagan turns to ask for a dissenting opinion, no, wala na. Everybody was for taking out Marcos. At so at that point, hindi na siya nasalba ni Reagan. Pero talagang ginawa ng president. Ang importanteng malaman natin dito kung ano yung nangyari sa Pilipinas pagkatapos noon.
Yes.
Di ba?
Yeah.
Tapos malalaman mo kung ano ang talagang pakay nila.
Correct.
Because Marcos was planning a agro-industrialization program for the country.
Right.
Meron na siyang energy development program. He was putting up dams as much as fast as he can. No?
Nuclear power.
Ganyan.
Matatasa na lahat.
So pagpasok ni Cory, sarado lahat yun.
Tapos iba na yung pinuntahan natin.
Iba na yung ating ekonomiya. Wala na tayo sa agro-industrial development
Manufacturing.
direction. Nandun na lang tayo sa service na call centers, tsaka yung mga nurses, tsaka caregivers.
Right.
Yun ang ating mga direksyon. Service economy.
Yeah.
From what might have been a producer economy.
Right. So again, but even before Marcos, we wanted to focus on the role of CIA, and it was pretty obvious. I'd like to play a clip from U.S. Was he Ambassador Palaez?
Yes. And Vice President.
Vice President Palaez talking about the 1950s, right after the war, President Magsaysay, and the CIA involvement in his administration, and the involvement in policymaking in the Philippines, that it was not a secret. Sige. Yes. Yeah, play na.
My experience with the CIA here was during the Magsaysay period, and it was well known by the people of the Philippines that he was backed by the United States without necessarily saying CIA, and the people accepted that, and so did I, because at that time we were in the early stages of our independence. That was we got independent in 1946, and at that time nobody had presented a program of social reform as vigorously as President Magsaysay. And the American policymakers here said that they favored the grassroots approach. And those of us who had been thinking of the social inequity of the distribution of wealth here, like the land holdings, for instance, which were in the hands of a few, we favored land reform and a community type of development in the villages. These were the main planks of Magsaysay's platform. He put it in a very apt praise. He said, to those who have less in life, they should have more in law. Those who have less in life should have more in law. And this caught on. And the people acclaimed this because they knew that 80-90% of our people are poor. And American policy was very much behind this, because one of the defects of American colonial policy is that they allowed the economy to be held by a few, while the rest of the masses were still mired in poverty. And so at that particular time, the CIA openly helped Magsaysay, and the people voted for Magsaysay overwhelmingly, knowing that he had the open support of the American government.
I wanted to show also a a picture of Magsaysay with yeah.
This is President Magsaysay with Edward Lansdale. Siya yung CIA station chief dito. Of course, general siya, pero actually CIA siya. No?
Yes.
Siya ang may control kay Ramon Magsaysay.
In effect, siya yung-
Nakikita nyo,
Oh.
dahil katulad nga ng sinabi ni Senator Pelaez, who eventually became Vice President, no? The presence of CIA and the influence of America was welcome during that time. That's the way these politicians saw it, because they said yung grassroots type of support and all of that, even land reform, kasi nag-umpisa siya sa land reform.
Right.
At ito ang programa ni Magsaysay. Marahil yan ang programa ni Lansdale na para maging even more popular
Yes.
si Magsaysay, because he wanted the populist. This guy was the poor boy from
Zambales.
Zambales. He was ang benta sa kanya, he was a mechanic, no. Although not really, because they were landed, no.
Right.
Pero ang benta sa kanya, simpleng tao lang to, mekaniko lang.
Man of the people.
Yeah. We're not taking anything away from Magsaysay,
Right.
no.
Right.
Because later on, pinatay din siya ng CIA, no.
Yeah, 1957,
Nung,
his plane crashed.
Pinacrash nila yung aeroplano niya. At again, ang suspecha dito yung engine trouble na ginawa daw ng CIA. At any rate, etong si Lansdale, pinapahanap ko yung isang picture.
Right. Hindi ko makita sa net.
Pero alam ko, nakita ko to
Yeah, we've seen
noon.
that. Yes. In a book.
Yeah. It was a picture of President Magsaysay sitting at his desk, na as the presidential desk, na. At ang kanyang guest dun sa nakaupo dun sa silyang bisita dito sa harap niya, etong si Lansdale, at may hawak na tabako. Pero yung paa nitong si Lansdale nakapatong doon sa desk ng ating presidente, si Magsaysay.
Parang relax siya sa harap ng presidente.
Sa harap ng presidente. Pero isa siyang letrato na hindi ko malaman. Siguro okay lang sa mga tao noon dahil tinatanggap nilang presence ng CIA. Pero nung nakita ko po yun, nakakakulo po ng dugo, no?
Yes. Yeah.
Na parang ang tingin niya sa ang Pangulo ng Pilipinas ay ganyan lang, kaya niyang sampahan ng paa yung kanyang lamesa. No? Yan si Lansdale at yan ang CIA.
It was it looked very symbolic. Right? Na parang bata ko to.
Oo.
Ako may
hawak
akong gumawa nito, ako hawak nito. So, but if you know also, bakit natin sinasabi Edward Lansdale is here? Yung history po ni Lansdale, he was really involved in psychological operations and other things involving these types of things throughout his military career. So para siyang spiya. So he was not involved in directing the strategy of war, yung labanan, but he was involved in the propaganda effort. Yun yung history ni Lansdale. So he's involved in what we call the Special Operations Divisions. And this guy, after World War II, maalala po natin, again, we have to remind everybody. Remember po, after World War, nung namatay po si Roosevelt, 1945, nag-take over na po yung British influence, yung colonial influence, yung ating tinatawag na deep state. Pumasok na po sila ulit. Roosevelt represented a time against these types of ano. So nung namatay siya, pumunta si Truman and the US again turned into like colonial mentality. And this is a result of that. And we were in that sphere of influence. And this is Colonel Lancel, and his operations were Southeast Asia and Philippines. And in 1957, namatay po si 24 out of 25 passengers died in that plane crash. Bago pa yung plane na yan eh. They just bought it. I think it was 2 years old. They just bought it, again, from the Americans, obviously. And it was a converted military plane. That was the presidential plane called Pinatubo. And he died in Cebu. And the only one who survived was a journalist.
Yeah,
Si Tayak? No, not Tayak.
no.
Anyway, so you can research that. I forgot the name, but he was the only one who survived this, and he was taken over by his vice president Carlos Garcia.
Right.
Right? And then you have that. But si Lancel, but I wanted to emphasize that the influence of the CIA, Nestor Mata. Yun, siya lang Nestor Mata became editor-in-chief of, or he owned the newspaper.
He was either editor-in-chief or publisher of one of the newspapers.
Malaya? Not Malaya.
No, not
Jake
Malaya.
Makasay. So, that's Edward Lansdale in the Philippines. And we can put forward, it can be argued that the influence of the CIA has been with us ever since the colonial period. You have to look at it.
Realize that the Philippines is very important
Strategically.
to the United States. It is very important to any superpower
Yeah.
because the Philippines is strategically located. No, it's like the gateway towards Asia. No, from the Western world. No, from the United States and from yung Philippines, makikita nyo, it's like a gateway. At kanya, kung sinong may control ng Pilipinas, no, malaki ang influence dito sa parte ng Asia.
Yeah.
Katulad ngayon, di ba? Nakikita nyo naman kung anong nangyayari. So, yan ang importante. Pero meron kang sinasabi na si Lansdale, kasi ang CIA nag-ooperate minsan sa loob ng Amerika din. No?
Yes.
At depende kung ano kasi ang kanilang operation, nakaka-apekto sa labas.
Right.
No?
And spying on their own citizens also.
Noong panahon ni John F. Kennedy, may away.
Yeah.
Ang political section ng Amerika tsaka yung industrial section. No? Yung military-industrial complex na sinasabi nila. No? Ito yung magkakuntsaba ng mga politiko tsaka yung mga malalaking factories na gumagawa ng armas. Gusto nilang ipagpatuloy yung gera sa Vietnam. Si Kennedy naghahanap ng paraan para iwas na siya dito sa Vietnam. Dahil sabi niya doon sa kanyang libro, bata pa siya, pumunta na siya sa Vietnam tsaka sa Thailand at nakita niya yung lugar, no? At nagustuhan niya yung mga tao, no? Pero ayaw niya ang kumokontrol sa kanila ang Amerika dahil nagagalit sila sa mga Amerikano. Tapos ito ang pinaglalaban nila. Nung nalaman nila na Kennedy was planning to withdraw from the Vietnam War and give independence to Vietnam, nag-operate ang CIA. Kasi ang CIA kasama din ng military-industrial complex. Nag-operate sila dito kay Kennedy. At hindi, kasama na din pati yung FBI.
Right.
No? At gumawa silang paraan para patayin si Kennedy. This is this is still theory, no?
Yeah.
But everything now is a theory because nobody really knows who killed Kennedy, no?
Yeah.
But when you piece these things together from certain intelligence sources, no, makikita mo na yun ang reason. Because Kennedy was warning the people in one of his late speeches, no, that there are institutions and agencies,
Yeah. Yeah.
that were working against the interests of the American people.
Right. But
And-
he mentioned the CIA.
He mentioned the CIA, no? At
And he said he would shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Kasi masyado ng powerful ang CIA.
Ngayon, ikaw yung CIA, sumama ka na dito sa grupo na pumatay kay Kennedy. Yun ang
Tanggalin
sinasabi natin
natin,
that they have a motive
Mm.
for killing him. No?
Right.
And yun nga ang
Yeah.
nga ang nangyari.
I wanted to say also, and how do you know this? Siyempre, we put it all together sa lahat ng research namin and yung pag-uusap namin and some on YouTube, marami pong videos kasi ang dami pong materials tungkol doon. But I wanted to say, remember Edward Lansdale in the Philippines, 1953, 57, 54, with Magsaysay. And then he is also found to be in the place where John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, in Dealey Plaza.
He was in Texas.
He was in Texas. There's a picture there that I will show you. The other one, I think the second one with the arrow. Use the second one with the arrow para makita yung pinadalang isa. So, he was there in Dealey Plaza. And this is type of the special operations, yung tinatawag na hindi sinasabi kung anong gagawin nila. It's not known to the public. But these are special operations. Yung pangalawang picture na pinadala ko na may arrow. Kasi nakatalikod siya dyan eh. But everybody and witnesses were saying and journalists were also saying that he was there. What was he doing there? He was not in active service, but it was known that he was involved in the military and operations of these special operations, special type of operations. In Dallas, Texas, the day that Kennedy was assassinated. So I wanted to show you a picture. This is from the internet, of course. And then, makita natin ito. May arrow dyan. Yan po si Edward Lansdale.
Yung naglalakad na nakatalikod.
Yes, and the police, these two beside him, yung mga katabi niya, suspects dapat sa assassination. Kasi nung nangyari yung assassination, magulo, yung local police, kinuha lahat ng witnesses, kinuha lahat ng mga ginagawa mo dyan. Hindi ka naman bakit? So, pinasok nila.
Note how far back the police can.
Itong dalawa dapat suspects, pero parang tila naglalakad lang sila. Show that. Okay, paulit. So, you will see the picture. Yung comment ng nag-post, sabi niya, note how far back the police were walking. How casually they hold their guns. Ibig sabihin, hindi parang hindi suspects tong dalawang to. Itong nakaharap sa atin. Itong may arrow dyan, yan si Lansdale. Parang lumalabas siya sa police station. Naglalakad lang sila. Parang casual lang. Pero itong dalawan, may mugshots yan. Pero para silang sa presinto. For questioning. Pero parang walang urgency. Okay lang.
Hindi binabantayan,
Hindi binabantayan. So that's just one of the pictures. The other thing, and Edward Lansdale was known to have been with the CIA. This is what his expertise was. Itong mga special operations na ganito around the world. Okay? And make it look like an accident or make it look, ito was assassination. And we won't go into the Kennedy assassination. Marami na po. Maybe next week we can go into the Kennedy assassination. Maganda po yun. Maganda talaga yan because there's so much evidence coming to light now. Kasi how many years ago lang na declassify yung information pero hindi fully declassified pa. So maganda pong pag-usapan niya. But he was there. The other person that was there, and I'm still trying to look for a picture, papadala ko sa iyo, was the U.S. presidents, two U.S. presidents, George Herbert Walker Bush and his son, George W. Bush.
Nandun din sa Texas. No?
Nandun, bata pa si George W. Bush, si Herbert Walker was an officer in the CIA. He was there in that area where namatay. Kasi Texas sila lahat, di ba?
Si George Bush po, yung matandang George Bush, he was, ang last position niya before he became Vice President of the U.S. was he was second in command to in the Central Intelligence Agency.
Right.
No? Siya yung in charge naman nung pag tulong kay ano nang pangalan nun? Yung sa South America.
Mexico or
Hindi. Pasensya na kayo. Pero there was a country, Ortega.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Anong country yon?
I don't know, Colombia maybe. I'm not sure.
Not Colombia. But siya yung Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah. Si Ollie North.
Oliver North, tsaka
and
si George Bush.
Right,
No?
right.
Naghanap ng mga armas, no?
Right.
Para ibigay dito sa kay Ortega, siya yung rebelde noon dito sa isang bansa sa South America.
Right.
Para makuha nila yung mga armas, nagbenta sila ng droga. At
Right,
binenta ni meron po kaming ano diyan. Iran-Contra affair. Meron ang LaRouche organization, meron po kaming
Yes.
documentation diyan ng storya.
Yeah.
Yung si Oliver North tsaka si George Bush hindi nila pwedeng hingan ng pera ang gobyerno para tanggalin yung
Right.
So nag-ooperate sila para matanggal regime change.
Right.
So ang pinopondohan nila yung mga rebelde, yung mga rebelde nung lugar na yon.
Right.
So but they needed money to buy the guns. No? How did they get money? They bought drugs from Colombia, no?
Yeah.
And these drugs they sold in the black district of
The U.S. Compton.
LA,
Yeah.
in Los Angeles.
Yeah, yung depressed area.
Yun ang pinili nila kasi alam nila gusto nila din masira yung black area, no? So doon nila binenta yung drugs. Kinuha nila yung pera para bumili ng armas. Tapos pinadala sa Nicaragua. That was the country, Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Yung armas daw, hindi natin alam kung saan binili. Siguro somewhere here in Southeast Asia or in Iran. No?
Or Afghanistan.
Pero tago yan eh. You cannot be moving so many arms.
Right.
Ang sabi nila, chismis lang to, dinaan pa daw yan sa Pilipinas para hindi magmukhang galing sa Amerika. No? Galing yung mga CIA, ganyan. So, umabot doon. Ang nagbigay po ng isang storya nito at nagsiwalat nito ay ang LaRouche movement.
Right.
Nung si Lyndon LaRouche, linabas niya ito, he called it the Iran-Contra affair.
Right.
And he brought out precisely Oliver North, the role of Oliver North, the role of George Bush, no, and other characters there. And actually, he dared. Because at that time, when it came out, George Bush was already vice president. He was daring George Bush to file a libel case against him so that
Si LaRouche to.
so that he will bring out all of the facts. No?
Right.
George Bush never filed the case, but because of this Iran-Contra affair, yung Senate run ni Oliver North
Wala.
nasira. Dahil binibida nila noon si Oliver North like a
War hero.
war hero, all-American soldier.
Right.
But because of this, no,
Yeah.
nasira yung kanyang political career at he never ran for office again. But si George Bush became vice president and eventually became president. And when he became president, he put LaRouche in jail
Yeah. Grabe.
on trumped-up charges. No? At buti na lang na-exonerate siya pagdating ni... Hindi siya na-exonerate na... he was out on
Hindi exonerate. Parang
parole.
Parole.
No? Ni Clinton. And now LaRouche is dead. But what we're saying is this is the way the CIA operates.
Marami pang examples, and like they mentioned kanina sa South America, yung United Fruit. Nako, magandang storya niyan. And then how their involvement in Cuba, their involvement right after the Spanish-American War that started after the turn of the century. Lumaki tong American fruit, and how bananas were introduced to the United States. Malaking storya, maganda po yan. So we can discuss all of those things later in succeeding episodes. Pero we wanted to emphasize that the overreach, we're not even talking about CIA involvement in Europe. Na-mention ni Chairman kanina, Ukraine. But Europe and other areas of the world which they consider strategic. One of their... So nakita na natin, we went through how influential they are in terms of giving money, giving politicians power, take out a sitting president, replace him with who they want, using NGOs and using all of these other organizations. But the most sinister way they do it is through propaganda. It's number one, because that conditions the minds of the population. So we have a short video also just to show and right now what they use is our news media, and sometimes a lot of our friends in the news media don't even know that they're being parrots. They're just saying what these guys want them to say. So I just want to show a short clip about how this can be used and how people should wake up from what they call mainstream news again.
Okay.
In the early 1980s, roughly 50 different companies owned 90% of American media. By 1992, that number had dropped to less than 24. And in recent years, that same 90% has fallen to just 6 major conglomerates. Although various mergers and layers of external control make this an inexact number, most of the Big Six hold interests in film production, cable and broadcast television, news, sports, music, and online streaming. So, who exactly controls the media? As of 2015, the largest media company in the world by revenue is Comcast. According to the SEC, in 2014, they reportedly made nearly $69 billion. Like the other conglomerates, Comcast owns nearly every step in media production and distribution. In fact, Comcast is the single largest cable provider on Earth. Content is created through subsidiaries like NBC Universal, which is then broadcast over TV and the internet through Xfinity. Comcast is also a major internet service provider, covering more than half of all US broadband customers. Even online streaming giant Hulu is jointly owned by 3 of the Big Six. The next largest conglomerate is the Walt Disney Company, with reportedly roughly $48 billion in revenue. Disney has holdings in theme parks, movie studios, and diverse television networks such as ABC, A&E, and ESPN. They also own a number of legacy companies like Pixar, Marvel Entertainment, and Lucasfilms of the Star Wars franchise. The third of the Big Six is 21st Century Fox, which emerged in 2013 as a spin-off of Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. Today, Fox makes about $32 billion a year and is predominantly focused on film and television, including Fox News Channel, which made nearly $800 million in ad revenue in 2014. The last independent conglomerate is Time Warner, with revenues of about $27 billion. In the 1990s, they were the largest media company in the world. but an unsuccessful merger with AOL at the peak of the dot-com bubble made them lose nearly $100 billion in 2002. Since then, AOL and Time Inc., as well as Time Warner's entire cable division, have become separate companies. Because they are now unrelated, Time Warner and Time Warner Cable are the 4th and 5th largest media companies in the world, according to Forbes. Finally, the last two are CBS and Viacom. In 2013, they reported about $14 to $15 billion in revenue each. They used to be a single company controlled by National Amusements, a movie theater chain. Today, although they are individually held, National Amusements owners have enough stock in both to effectively dictate control. So in a way, there aren't even 6 conglomerates, but 5. Or maybe there are 7. Some, including Time Warner's former vice chairman Ted Turner, have said media conglomerates have become oligopolies and that they stifle innovation. But others point out that they can also provide a greater global reach for smaller and newer companies. In fact, I work for one of those newer companies, Fusion, which is partially owned by ABC Disney. Check out my mini documentary about independent citizen journalists in Brazil challenging Rio's police brutality. This complex of favelas was once firmly in the hands of the Red Command, a notorious narco-trafficking.
Just a short brief on how many companies actually own all of the media companies in the world. Okay, so where you get your news is from very few companies. And how the CIA is involved in this? Bakit ko minention yung CIA? The CIA was able, because of the monies generated from the budget ng US, intelligence budget is this, but they get a lot of their money through illegal operations. Na-mention nga ni Chairman is about selling drugs, buying and selling drugs, a lot of those other things. Afghanistan, they're involved in many different things. Kasi medyo pailalim yung galaw nila. Alright? So they're involved in many illegal activities to fund their operations. And a lot of them have put up investment companies para siyang front ng CIA. And they invest in all of these companies. And a lot of them are media companies because their interest is to be able to condition each population when they feel like it. Now, if the media is not free and independent, and it is controlled by very few companies, then it's easier to control how you think, how people think. There is talk, and we can do more research on this, that even Facebook and YouTube and Google, the CIA front companies, are involved in this because it is in their interest. Again, the principal intention of any intelligence company is to gather information. And in Facebook and all of our social media, tayo pa nagbo-volunteer ng information. Tayo pa nagpo-post ng mga picture ng pamilya.
That's only the, I would say, the passive aspect. No? There is a active aspect, which is to disinform the public. No? They go into disinformation. They mislead the public into believing something which is not there. Fake news, no? Yan. Primero, kontrolin ka nila na you become a habit to listen to them. Afterwards, ang tingin mo sa kanila, totoo na yung sinasabi nila. Once they get you there, here is where they control you na. Kung anong sasabihin nila, yun ang totoo. No? And that is the most damaging thing that they can do to society. And they dumb down society. And the more dumbed down society is, the more controllable they will be. No? And this has happened in the Philippines here. Dito lang tingnan mo, lahat ng mainstream media natin are owned by the oligarchs. No? Lahat sila. At gagawin nila ang paraan para ilabas yung kanilang gustong ilalabas at itago yung dapat nilang itago dito sa mga kanilang sa kanilang mga pinagkakautangan. Na ngayon, etong CIA, very influential yan dyan sa mga mainstream media, no? Because they have the resources, they pay, no? And they give concessions to these people, no? These are close to government people. Yung mga oligarchs natin gusto din magpalakas sa mga opisyales ng mga gobyerno,
Yeah.
no? Sa embassy o kaya sa Washington DC. Mga oligarchs na ito no? Marami na silang gusto. Kanya papayag sila kung anong gagawin ng gugustuhin ng CIA. Ang palagay ko noon na palagay ko lang po, pinakamalapit noon sa CIA ay ang ABS-CBN. No? Dahil nakikita ko po sa kanilang direksyon, lalong-lalo na sa eleksyon, no? Nauuna pa sila sa COMELEC no? Sila ang nag-aanunsyo kung sinong panalo. Hindi pa na-anunsyo ng ng COMELEC, no? At yung tatandaan kong nung nakaraan na alala nung 2010 si
Kay
Noynoy Aquino pagkasabi ng hindi pa na-anunsyo,
Hindi pa official
hindi pa
announcement.
official. Pagkasabi pa lang ng ABS-CBN na panalo si Noynoy nung hating gabi, no? The next day, etong si Ambassador Harry Thomas ng Amerika. Ayun na, papunta na siya doon sa bahay ni Noynoy. Kaladkad niya itong mga tiga ABS-CBN, no? Tsaka itong mga ibang kasama niya sa embassy. At kinakamayan na si Noynoy na panalo doon sa kanyang pagka-presidente. No?
Wala pang official announcement.
Wala, no? Hindi na nila inintay. ABS-CBN na nagsabi. That was a breach, no?
Yeah.
Pero hindi natin po linabanan yan. Kami po nagtayo ng Solidarity for Sovereignty to fight it out in the Supreme Court because it was a breach of our sovereignty.
Correct.
Pero hindi po pinansin ng Supreme Court dati yon, no? Lahat po ng ahensya natin influence kasi ng mga Amerikano at ng CIA tsaka ng mainstream media. No? Yan po ang nangyayari sa atin nun. Gusto ko lang magbigay. Naalala ko kasi tungkol dito sa CIA. Kanina hindi ba sinabi ko yung sa Ukraine?
Yes. Nuland.
Si Nuland, CIA, tapos natanggal nila yung presidente doon. Naalala ko yon. Bago po nangyari yan sa Ukraine. I was having dinner with some people here in Makati. And I was invited there. There was a congressman there. I will not mention their names anymore. No? And a foreigner who was introduced to me as a World Bank consultant. No? And he had, so we were discussing these things. We were discussing country and all of that. And he said that I think he said by March or April of that year, and this was sometime, let us say, February or January, March or April that year, there was going to be a major change in Mindanao, no? That is going to help out all of the Mindanaoans, no? For them, there will be peace in Mindanao, and there will not be any moves towards secession and so on and so forth, no? Because he was involved in drafting the agreement, no? Between the parties concerned, no? And the Philippine government. Okay. So, tinanong ko, you were the one who drafted the agreement between the Philippine government and the other indigenous groups, no? Yes, sabi niya ganyan. As what? As World Bank consultant? So, naano na siya. Yes, sabi niya. Tapos, sabi ko, as World Bank consultant, you drafted the agreement. That's something new, sabi ko. But, at that time, in Mindanao, I was telling him, Mindanao is suffering from a major energy crisis, wherein they were having 12-hour brownouts in different rotational areas. 12-hour brownouts are tremendous, has a tremendous debilitating effect on the economy of the people from Mindanao.
Yeah.
Since you are in World Bank, did this peace agreement that you came up with, did this include at least assistance from the World Bank to fund their energy requirements, because that is also causing social unrest? He said no. Did it even cross your mind that there should be something like this? There was no need, because the parties were already agreed with what they were doing. No? And then I just sat back and I showed, nakita niya na parang kung sinasabi, wag mo akong babulahin. No? Wag mo akong babulahin, palagay ko CIA ka.
Right.
No? Any rate, although I didn't tell it to his face that I think he's CIA, and he was doing something not for our country,
Right.
because the agreement that they created was designed to create trouble rather than, it was designed to create trouble between the Nur Miswari faction and the MILF and the other people in Davao, mga Christians.
And had nothing to do with helping spur economic
nothing.
activity, nothing.
And yet,
As
he was
World Bank.
called a World Bank consultant. So, parang I sat back and he knew that, and he became uncomfortable because we were face to face. After a while, tumindig lang siya, pumunta lang siya sa CR. Pagbalik niya, tinawag niya yung asawa niya, Pilipina, no? Uwi na daw sila. No? Ayaw na umupo ulit, makipag-usap. Uwi na daw sila. Tapos sabi ko, why are you leaving so early? Sabi ko, I have to catch a plane early tomorrow morning. I said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Ukraine. Sabi niya, I'm going to Ukraine. Wala pang gulo sa Ukraine noon. Hindi pa natin nababalitaan yung upheaval sa Ukraine noon. So I just put things together. Gusto sabihin, nung kinailangan siya sa Ukraine, nag-operate na sila, no? At doon, nagkagera na sa Ukraine.
Yung mga consultants na to, di ba?
I still know the name of the guy, no? But I will not, of course, disclose it here. No?
Right.
But the other guy that remembers this, no, is a good congressman friend of mine. No? And one time, it was he who reminded me
Of that conversation.
because he was right
naalala
there.
pa niya. Anyway.
Eto mga CIA talaga.
Yeah, and they operate, marami po hindi mo akalain na gano'n. But again, the principle is to gather and then they decide whether they can subvert or not. Then doon na sila gagalaw. Hindi mo akalain. So, but I wanted to bookend this the before we start reading our comments, no? Again, the CIA and how they influence, media is number one. And nakikita po natin ngayon, hindi lang sa mainstream media, ito yung gusto nilang ipalabas. This is how they change your mind and influence you and brainwash you. Kung mainstream news ang pinapanood mo, you will parrot, repeat mo lang yung sinasabi nila. Okay? Hindi mo aakalain na hindi totoo sinasabi. And free speech is put down. Free speech is curtailed. And they don't care. And actually, right now, we are experiencing it now, even dito sa ating Katipunan, in the Philippines and around the world. That free speech is being curtailed by these same forces because they don't want to know. It's a propaganda effort. They want a certain behavior from the population and they will suppress and prevent anybody else from talking and speaking the truth. Okay, ito po nangyayari ngayon. Ngayon, right now. So every time they shadow ban or every time they strike, this is what's happening. So yun lang po. This is a good discussion and marami pa we will continue next week with more discussion kasi marami po. I mean, this is world history. This is ano.
We will try to talk about the assassination of JFK
maganda yun. Yeah.
next week. Kung maalala ko at maalala niya.
Sige. Pero maraming materials yon. So it's a nice discussion. Oh, good. Again, we go to our comments from RMN and YouTube and Facebook. Again,
By the way, before you go, before we
sige.
start reading the comments of our friends, ginagawa po natin ito palagi. Kung titignan nyo, itong sisiwalat nitong mga informasyon na ito, obviously, to some of you, it is educational. No? But more than being given an education, tingnan nyo po anong application dito po sa nangyayari sa ating bansa. And it is always directed towards that. Tuwing nagsasalita po kami, pinapakita natin kung ano ang ginagawa din dito sa ating bansa para nare-relate ninyo, no? And so that it gives you awareness, no? That all of these things, that doesn't mean na ang Philippines is immune to it. As a matter of fact, as we speak now, especially nowadays, I'm sure the Philippines is swarming with CIA agents.
Lalo na now.
By the way, CIA agents, iba-ibang level. Meron operative na talagang gagawa ng paraan para patayin si ganito. Meron operative gagawa ng paraan para mag-create ng gulo ng oposisyon. Poponduhan yung mga rebel, yung mga pati na rin yung mga kaibigan natin NPA dyan. Hindi ako magugulat kung nabibigyan yan ng CIA.
The trolls rin.
Ha?
Trolls online.
Minsan mga trolls.
They work online.
Ito yung pampadestabilize na tinatawag, no? Para to soften the area at bumababa ang popularity ng isang leader, no?
Undermine the government.
Meron yung kukuha talaga ng assassin para barilin o magtapos ng granada o kung ano man. Yan ang mga operations ng CIA. The other one naman, yung ibang level naman, wala, andyan lang sila, nagbibigay sila ng konting information, maski na hindi nila alam kung ano yung kabuuan ng plano. Sasabihin, si ganito, si Itos Valdes, meron ka-date dito sa kaibigan nung isang Amerikano, general, ganyan. Yun lang. Walang kanuhin, pero ibibigay nila because they accumulate this information. Etong mga taong to, kung sino-sino to, at nakakatuwa dahil siguro ang pinapadala nila ng information isang empleyado sa US Embassy, no? Ang tingin nila sa sarili nila CIA na. Kaya mga iba nagyayabang pa. CIA ako, CIA. Hindi po yan. They're just information gatherers, no? Any kind of information na ipapadala, no? Yan pala ibang level yan. Yung isang higher level of information, meron ng analysis. Yung may analysis na, ano na yon, binabayaran na yon.
Kasi yung analysis gagawing policy.
Oo.
Yun
ang pagbabasihan nilang desisyon. Ganyan po yung level ng mga operations na yan.
Right.
No?
Anyway, so we go back to our comments in the interest of free speech, like we always do. We read as is, and but that's not necessarily reflect those of the station, of the channel. Freddy Oradina, present. Number 1, military-industrial complex, war. Number 2, testing industrial complex, pandemic, big pharma. 3, agriculture industrial complex, GMO, cancer-causing food. 4, Green New Deal, global warming, chemical destruction of industry by discarding fossil fuel oil. All for eugenics, transhumanism, and depopulation.
Right?
Yolanda Reyes, good evening po sa lahat ng Katipunero. Mabuhay. James Arnejo, present from General Santos City. Oy, home to our Pac-Man. Na may laban na in August. Good evening po sa lahat. Gloria Siebert, Guten Abend, Sir Butch, watching from Germany. Emma Mendoza, good evening everyone. On the air din po kayo sa DZXL. Good. Ganyan ang ginawa nila sa Pilipinas noong panahon ni Marcos at naipalit si Cory. Exactly. Carlo EY, this is about micro blood clots. Yan, may siya, link. Federico Mana, good evening po sa inyo watching. Toby Rose, God bless you sirs, always watching from Canada. Wilfredo Opiniano, gandang gabi po sa magtatay mabuhay. Marisa Season, good evening father and son idols, mabuhay po kayo. Ronnie Bonacruz, good evening Sir Butch and Sir Itos. Emma Mendoza, sa FB po ako nanonood, mabuhay po kayo. Praying for KDP and all Katipons. Virginia Malonzo, good evening Sir Butch, Sir Itos. Federico Mana, fact check, only weapon left for the cabals. Correct. Fact check, kasi that's propaganda. Avelina Olaes, blessed Sunday evening po Sir Butch and Sir Itos Valdes. God bless po. Rain, mga sir, naniniwala ba kayo sa climate change? At sabi ng mga eksperto, 9 years na lang o bago mag 2030 ay deadline ng mga bansa para mababa ang 1.5 degrees Celsius ang temperatura ng mundo para mabawasan ang carbon dioxide emission sa buong mundo at hindi mapipigilan ang irreversible effects ng climate change.
Ako po, hindi ako naniniwala dyan. At marami pong hindi naniniwala dyan. Pero ito ang isusubo sa atin ng mga iba-ibang gobyerno, lalong-lalo na po itong mga globalists. No? Ang talagang pinupuntirya ng climate change ay yung pagbabawas ng carbon emissions ng mga industriya. Gusto sabihin, ang mga factories kinakailangan, kung gusto nilang magtuloy, kinakailangan papatawan ng mas mataas na buwis hanggang magserado sila. No? At bakit po nila ginagawa ito? Gusto nilang pabagsakin talaga ang ekonomiya ng buong mundo.
Right.
Pag nababagsak yung ekonomiya ng buong mundo, magseserado itong mga factories, no? At wala nang industrial development and operations. Lalawak ang poverty. At lalawak ng poverty, tapos meron ka pang pinutulak na mga pandemic, no? At mga bakuna, ang laki ng bawas nito sa populasyon.
Right.
So the ultimate goal of all of these people is depopulation.
Right.
To bring down the world population by the billions.
Yep.
No? Hindi po natin alam kung hanggang saan nila aabutin ito. Pero itutulak nila to at gagawin nilang parang etong Green New Deal. Ang sasabihin dito sa climate change, kung gusto mong makipag-trade sa mga ibang bansa, no? Kinakailangan meron kang magko-commit ka dito sa mga carbon emissions. Babawasan mo 'yan,
right.
No? At yung mga factories mo at lahat 'yan babawasan mo. Magugulat kayo pati mga baka. Kailangan bawasan kasi daw yung mga tae at tutot ng baka nakakadagdag daw sa carbon emissions, no? Ganyan po ang ibang mga propose nitong mga environmentalists. They don't realize what they are pushing, no? That it is anti-human. Kaya, ito pong pag sinabi mong kinakailangan pipilitin kanila, hindi lang yon. Hindi ka pwedeng humiram. Kung bansa ka, hindi ka pwedeng humiram sa foreign countries o foreign commercial banks for your development.
Right.
Unless they put this condition.
Yeah.
Ngayon lang, hindi nyo alam, ang World Bank tsaka ADB, ang condition nila, no, sa pagpapahiram nila sa atin, malamang ang condition nila, ang mga lockdowns, ECQs, at shutdowns of businesses. Yan ang kondisyon para mabigyan ka ng loan. No? Isisiwalat ba ito ng ating gobyerno? Hindi. Bawal. No? Pagbabawalan sila. No? But these are all part of the conditionalities that eto naman nasa gobyerno, hindi lalaban.
Yeah.
Hindi nila ipaglalaban ang kapakanan ng taong bayan.
Right.
This is what we're facing. We are going to turn for the worse. Not because of our doing, but because of those enemies of humanity that want to destroy humankind through depopulation.
Okay. Ernie Ocampo, good evening po, KDP, Sir Itos Valdes, Prof. Butch Valdes, mabuhay pa kayo. Filemon De Vera, good evening, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, watching from Muntinlupa. John Cyril Anato, Sunday evening, Sir Butch and Sir Itos, Godspeed you, always watching and listening from here from Capiz. Mga sirs, sana po try nyo makapanayam si Congressman Marcoleta at Congressman Defensor dahil nakahalata na sila na ginagawa mga buang na fact checkers pagbura ng totoong info sa accounts ng Real Health. Correct. Maybe one day we'll get them on air and interview them. Pero yun na nga, ito yung nangyayari sa atin. Ito na nakalungkot na they're really trying to suppress the truth. Zenea Arcilla, good evening, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. Listening here in Hong Kong, God bless you both. Angeline Leasing, good evening, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. Listening from Hong Kong, God bless both. Nick Borromeo, good evening po, Sir Itos, Sir Butch, watching from Santa Rosa City, Laguna. Ganon ginawa ng CIA sa Soviet-Afghan War, Sir Butch and Sir Itos, ang modern-day Taliban. Called before ay Mujahideen na sinuplayan nila ng surface-to-air missiles para panlaban sa Soviet Air Force. Yes, that's what created Osama Bin Laden. And Osama Bin Laden, asset po ng CIA yan mula sa umpisa. Okay, so pwede natin i-discuss. Maganda rin yan, 9/11, no? We can discuss 9/11 also here. Ana Galvez, blessed evening po, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. Lourdes Kalk, good evening, Professor Butch, Sir Itos from Accra City, West Africa. Professor Butch, dito po sa embahada, pinatatawag po kami mga wives na nag-warning sa amin na ang COVID-19 ay mananatili po.
That's true. It will stay because they will push and they will tell you that there are new variants.
Yes.
But you will realize that as they increase the number of people that they vaccinate, so does the increase in COVID-19 cases. No? Ano po, padami ng padami ang binabakuna, pero padami ng padami din ang nakakasakit. Hindi ba po pag dumadami ang bakuna, dapat bumababa ang nagkakasakit?
Ang positive.
Bakit padami ng padami din? Kasi yung mga nagbagong cases na sinasabi nila sa COVID ay nanggaling dun sa mga nabakunahan. No? Tanong nyo po sa Singapore. Ang Singapore po nagpahayag lang ngayon, no?
Yes, correct.
Na ilang porsyento? 70%.
75%.
75% of all those new COVID cases are COVID cases which come from the people who had just been vaccinated. No? Ito yung sinasabi natin side effects, pero COVID din. No? And this talaga, kung minsan, ang pag tinamaan ka, pagkatapos mo vaccinate, pag tinamaan ka ng COVID, you can die. No? Yan po ang nangyayari. Kanya, what do they care? No. Will they push it all continuously until they can kill as many people as they can?
Annabelle Casper, good evening po from Heidelberg, Germany. Dito rin sa Ukraine, CIA din. Sila din ang pasimuno dahil gusto nila ma-extend ng US military base doon. Yung American friend ko mismo nagsabi sa akin. Yes, but in that case, it is NATO. It is NATO which is part of the whole deep state military-industrial complex. Alala po natin, and I have to remind everybody, the only US president in the past 2 decades that has gone against this deep state is President Donald Trump. Okay, so yun lang, paalala ko sa inyo. He went against the CIA, alam niya po yung galaw ng mga taong to, and he went against it. Melchor Elmino, good evening sa KDP at kay Sir Butch Kaitos watching from Las Piñas. Adriano Flores, good evening ka Butch Kaitos. Napakaganda ng talakayan nyo ngayon. Yan ang mga gusto kong paksa sa mga naganap sa mundo. Mabuhay po kayo. Thank you. Ava Kylie Rue, International Caucasian Court. Tawag dyan kay Norman Finkelstein. Kasi they investigate the third world country regime except Israel.
Karamihan po ng mga tinamaan niya ng ICC, alam nyo kung ano? African countries.
Yes.
Kasi doon marami silang ginagawang regime change. Kanya ang pinututukan nila yung African countries and a few Asian countries. Pero marami po sa Africa. No?
Ginagamit lang to pang ano?
They regime change.
Yes.
No?
The ICC is being used as an instrument to further their own interests all the time. John Cirilo Nato, traitor talaga tong taga-CIA. Sila pala yung mastermind kung bakit napapang si President Marcos. Putanginan hina kayo, mga kabalols. Kapamura ako. Cesar Asar, Kaitos Kabush, ganyan ang ginagawa nila kay McCoy dahil sila dahilan kaya bumagsak si McCoy, hindi naman people flower. Yun na nga, nagyabang nga sila eh. Diba? Si George Shultz, Secretary of State, nagyabang siya. Problema, dito sa amin parang yung mga NGO ayaw aminin, diba?
Anong pangalan ng title ng book again?
Turmoil and Triumph.
Turmoil and Triumph. Turmoil and Triumph. Libro po ito ni George Shultz.
Yeah.
Siya po yung State Department Secretary noon nung tinanggal si McCoy.
Yes.
Etong Turmoil and Triumph ay ang kanyang mga memoirs. No? Hanapin niyo po yung librong yan.
Yeah.
Makikita nyo, he devotes 2 chapters on the Philippines.
Yep.
At inaako niya na siya ang nagpatalsik kay McCoy. No? Hindi itong mga people power people. Gawa-gawa nila yan. No?
Yes.
Yung mga sumali dyan, siyempre, sumali na lang. Pero yung mga nagmaniobra,
Maniobra is the right word.
para gumawa niyan, ay yung mga bata ng mga CIA. No?
Cesar Soberano, after successful stint in the Philippines, Colonel Lansdale will be deployed to Vietnam for PSYOPs in the Vietnam War. Correct.
Right.
In the book by John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he asserted in essence that the CIA are jackals, meaning killers working for the interests of the deep state, military, industrial, and financial complex.
That's right, Cesar.
We have that book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Nabili ko yan sa National Bookstore. Di ko alam kung available pa yan. Pero may part 2 pa siya eh. So this one, he details United Fruit and all of this. Magandang read yan. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Richie Sento Marcelo, ano pa masasabi niyo sa trending art dito sa SOCMED? Yung tumindig na drawing ng artist na si Tarantadong Kalbo. Ito raw ay ukol sa pagtutol sa umano'y nalalabag na karapatang pantao. Ano pong masasabi niyo? Salamat. You want to
Hindi ko pa.
Ako ay.
Do you know it? Oh, sige.
Yeah, nakikita po yan. But it's one of those, ano lang yan, pang sa akin po, it's one of those pinapatrending nila laban kay Duterte. But it doesn't say anything about this lockdowns. It doesn't say anything about vaccinations. It doesn't say anything about what's happening really in the world. Ang gusto lang nito is against Duterte. Kaya may pa-arty sila, tapos ginagaya ng ibang tao, tumindig daw, lumaban sa gobyerno. Alam na natin, election na eh. So, ganun ang nangyayari. Crime bustre. Gandang
Ako, tatandaan po ninyo, ngayon dahil dito sa ginagawa ng pamahalaan, dito sa COVID, etong mga pinipilit nilang lockdowns at shutdowns, tapos malaking epekto sa ating ekonomiya, 22 million po ang walang trabaho ngayon sa atin, no? Malaking epekto to sa kanyang popularidad, no? Pero hindi, siyempre, lahat na ng may kanya-kanyang interest. Meron mga iba dyan, gustong sakyan ito para sila naman ang uupo. May mga iba dyan talagang ipaglalaban ang karapatan pang tao, no? Lalong-lalo na dun sa mga ayaw mapilitan silang magpabakuna, no? That's a basic against human rights, no?
Yeah.
And there are those also that are warning the president that he has to do what is right, no? Kami po sa KDP, dito kami sa pangatlo, no? We are warning the president that things are going to get worse for him if he doesn't do what is right. And what we say is right, his first thing is to dismantle the stranglehold of the oligarchs on our people vis-a-vis the public utilities. Yung paghawak nila sa kuryente, sa tubig, sa telecom, yan ang sumasakal sa mamayang Pilipino. Kinakailangan buwagin niya yan. Kinakailangan buwagin niya yan para mawalang ng kakayanan ang mga oligarko magmudmud ng pera sa mga senador at sa mga kongresista at sa Malacanang din. At mawawalan silang kakayanan na bilhin ang mga eleksyon natin sa COMELEC at sa Smartmatic. Once you dismantle the oligarchs, they will not have the resources to destroy the country. No? Ngayon, they own the country. No? They own it. So you have to dismantle that. That's the first step towards economic recovery and towards doing what is going to be good for the Filipino people. If you are afraid to do it, then you ask the military to help you to do it. No? And if you're still not gonna do it, well, the people might do it. No? Wag na sana tayo umabot dun sa people. Kasi baka madugo. No? Ikaw na lang, Mr. President, ikaw naman ang Pangulo eh.
Okay. John Fais Monfer, kaya pala siguro nakaupo si Biden as president ng US nang dahil sa manipulated din ng mga kolokay na CIA. Well, that's obvious na may kasama yung CIA, kasama yung deep state, everything around that. So,
FBI, kasama.
Yeah, so obviously lumalabas na nga sa US, nangyayari ngayon sa US, yung mga auditing ng kanilang election, forensic audit na never been done in the history of the United States. Ngayon lang nila ginagawa to. So this is historic. And they're finding out ang daming kaguluhan. So abangan po natin ang mga mangyayari dyan. Marami po nangyayari behind the scenes. Di po natin nakikita sa CNN. Siyempre, kasama yan. The CIA Network News, di ba? Crime bustre. Gandang gabi po sa inyong dalawa. Keep safe always. Ganda ulit namang issues na pinikol nyo sa bayan. Dagdag kaalaman. Pag maraming alam, di malalamangan. Correct. Sana buong Pilipinas manood ng talakayan mga ganito. So far, KDP pa lang may ganitong talakayan sa bansa. Salamat sa inyo. God bless po.
Thank you.
Arok Alip, ang makakaliwang grupo sa atin nung panahon ni Marcos ay nahati at nagkaroon ng rift dahil din sa CIA na nagpakawala ng deep penetration agent para magkaroon ng awayan sa loob mismo sa samahan nila.
Yeah.
Jose Perez Oco, media, news, education, cinema, video games, and culture is deliberately oversimplified by the deep state to promote dumbing down the society over the years to diminish all our critical thinking and standard learning and language. Correct. That's part of the undermining of sovereign nation states. Secu Group Manila. Mabuhay ang KDP watching from Fairview QC. Betchay, ang sarap nyo pong pakinggan, Sir Butch. Interesting and informative. Idol ko po kayo sa talakayan. More power po.
Salamat, Betchay.
Choi Ursal, kasama po ba dito nangyayari kay President Marcos? Yun na nga. Kimi and Dayaptung, yes. Napaka-refreshing po ang mga information ng updates nyo, Sir Butch at Sir Itos, to aware all Filipinos and finally gumising at umabas na sa August to try to protect and take back our country. Virgilio Vera Villanueva, salamat po Sir Itos, Sir Butch. Tuloy nyo po ang pagmulat nyo sa masa. Pinoto ko po kayo last election.
Thank you.
Oscar Hercito, nice Sir Itos, Sir Butch. Sana po JFK assassination mapag-usapan nyo. Thanks po. Oh, maganda yan. Next week. Is that all?
Meron pa.
Meron pa ba? Okay, Nonoy Sisona. Kabutch, hindi ako naniwala dyan sa climate change dahil yan ay world economic sabotage. At pinopromote ng Kyoto Convention na Clear Air Act for carbon credit. Mabuhay po kayo, Kabutch at Itos. Correct. Franklin James Silverio, corrupt talaga mga global oligarchs. Multi-trillionaire sila. Nagsusupply ng ginto sa World Bank na i-distribute ng World Bank sa bawat bansa. Johnny D.S. Good evening, sirs. Very informative and educational. Would it be possible the assassination of Ninoy could be perpetrated by the CIA?
I wouldn't discount it, you know?
Yeah.
Kasi, ang pwede nilang ginawa, inudyukan nila si Ninoy, binulungan nila si Ninoy na bumalik ka na sa Pilipinas
Right.
dahil may sakit si Marcos. Kung hindi ka babalik, si Imelda ang magiging presidente. So, inudyukan siya. Tapos, kinausap naman nila dito ang mga tao ni Marcos. Oy, babalik dito si Ninoy. At manggugulo dito. Bahala na kayo kung anong gagawin nyo sa kanya dahil susuportahan namin naman si Marcos. No? Parang pinagsabong lang tayo.
Yeah.
Ganyan din ang kanilang kagagawan. Kaya nila yan. No?
Yeah. And I would add to that. Again, sabi ni Chairman kanina, the way you know who was involved is what happens afterwards.
The beneficiary.
Sino yung nagbe-benefit ng situation na to. So, the way they were doing it, if you were to read all of the history around it, is that Marcos was already falling out. Si George Shultz and the rest were trying to get him out. Hindi nila matanggal. So they started many different ways. And one of them was to blame the obvious assassination on him. They tried that and it created a groundswell against him. Now, we're not saying we don't have information that directly involved yet, but the way things happen and looking back, sino ba nagbe-benefit? Ano yung benepisyo sa yung nag-udyok, who put Cory there? What happened to the economy? What happened to the country? Anong businesses ang namatay at ano yung nabuhay? So things like that leads us to conclude that yes, they would be involved. Sila lang naman gumagawa ng ganito eh. Diba? So, of course.
Tingnan nyo po, ang nakinabang si Cory at ang kanyang mga alipores tsaka yung mga sumunod sa kanya, hanggang yung anak niya, hanggang ngayon, pati na rin yung mga nandito sa mga tao ni Duterte sa gobyerno. Yan pong mga yan ang nakinabang. No? Sino pong naghirap? Ang taong bayan.
Right.
Hindi po ba? No? Ang unang-unang ginawa ni Cory, sinirado yung nuclear power plant para wala tayong kakayanan umunlad. At yun ang nangyari sa atin.
Yep. Randy Castillo, good evening Sir Butch and Itos. Maganda na naman ang topic nyo tonight. Ano bang comment nyo dito sa Pegasus spyware na ginawa ng isang com ng Israel? Hindi ko po alam yan muna. I will do research. Sige. Conrad Lebag, good evening. Very informative po. How about the Jesuits po? Nako, do you know something about them and how they meddle in the country? Nako, magandang topic rin yan po. Historical po yan. I think we sort of glossed over it in the Illuminati discussion 2 weeks ago. But of course, we can go back to that specifically. Choi Ursal, nabanggit ni Karen Hudes, former World Bank person ng CIA, ang may gawa sa nangyari kay President Marcos katulad ng ginagawa nila sa other countries. So kasama po kaya sila sa secret operations? Same question as kanina. Again po, ayun, Sir Butch, I love your shirt. Oh, very nice, very nice. Nakakapayat. Gusto ko rin ng ganyan. Danny Benares, tama po kayo Sir Butch Valdes at Itos Valdes na ang Variado ay galing mismo sa Bakulao. Ganyan talaga ang ginawa ng globalist ka ba? Mark Sibulo, good evening sa Itos and Sir Butch at sa lahat ng manonood. Dan? Okay. Alright.
Okay. Hanggang dyan na lang po tayo sa ngalan po ng ating mga katipon dito sa ating katipunan at sa mga galing na staff ng DZXL Radio Mo Nationwide. Kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinamahan niyo kami ngayon ang ora de peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo dito po sa ating katipunan. Hanggang sa linggo pong muli mga katipon, 7 to 9 p.m. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.